Can you believe that 2 years ago, when I graduated from college, the only bouquet I received was the one my parents brought? No party, no gifts, just a forced dinner that I had to pay for myself. But when my younger brother Ryan graduated 2 years later, my parents threw him a massive celebration at an upscale restaurant. After the party, they even turned to me and casually asked if I'd split the bill. That night, I finally had enough. Some people say I did the right thing by walking away from my family. Others argue that family means supporting each other no matter what. But after years of being overlooked and taken for granted, I realized that sometimes walking away is the only way to find peace. My name is Ethan, and I'm 25 years old. I work as a financial analyst and, until recently, lived with my parents. I used to believe that family was everything, that no matter what, we were supposed to lift each other up. But I learned the hard way that love in my family wasn't unconditional. It was reserved for my younger brother, Ryan, and no matter what I did, I would never measure up. I had always been independent. I worked 3 jobs in college, earned scholarships, and never asked my parents for a cent. Meanwhile, Ryan got his tuition paid, a used car as a gift, and a monthly allowance. I never complained. I told myself it was normal for the older sibling to be more responsible, but my patience ran out on the day of Ryan's graduation. That morning, as I was sipping my coffee before heading to work, my mom called me into the living room. My dad sat on the couch, flipping through a newspaper, while Ryan was still upstairs sleeping. "Ryan's graduation party is tonight," she said, not even looking up. "We've already booked a table at Monarch Steakhouse. Be there by 6, and don't forget to bring a gift." It wasn't an invitation. It was an order. I hesitated for a moment. My own graduation came and went without so much as a congratulations from them. I didn't get a party, or even a family dinner unless you count the meal I had to pay for. Seeing my hesitation, my mom sighed. "You're his older brother. It's the least you can do. If you don't have a gift, don't bother coming." I let out a small, dry laugh. Not an argument, not a plea, just a laugh. Then I picked up my car keys and left for work. But in my head, I was already making a plan. The entire day, I tried to focus on work, but the resentment kept bubbling up. I knew I would go to the party. Not for them, but because I wanted to see for myself just how deep their favoritism ran. And if they expected a gift, I'd make sure they got one they would never forget. So I bought Ryan a gift, a brand new laptop, worth nearly $2,000. And I had it set up for delivery right in the middle of his party. At 6, I arrived at Monarch Steakhouse. The place was packed. Over 50 guests filled the long tables, Ryan's friends, distant relatives, even my parents' colleagues. The decorations, the expensive dishes, the custom cake. It was a stark contrast to my graduation night. I scanned the room for a seat, but before I could find one, my mother approached me with her arms crossed. "You're late," she said, shaking her head. "There are no seats left." I frowned and pointed at an empty chair near Ryan. "What about that one?" She barely glanced at it before saying, "That's for one of Ryan's friends." I let out a slow breath and smirked. "Oh, I see. So a late arriving friend gets a seat, but I, his brother, don't." My father, who had been silent until now, sighed. "It's already arranged. You should have been here earlier." That was it. No apology. No attempt to accommodate me. Just pure dismissal. Then my mother asked, "Where's Ryan's gift?" Whispers started spreading through the guests. He came without a gift? The older brother should at least bring something. No gift, but he still expects to sit and eat. I smiled, pulled out my phone, and made sure my voice carried. "Yes, bring it inside." Murmurs filled the room. A few minutes later, the delivery guy walked in, holding a neatly wrapped package. Every eye turned toward us. I took a step forward, my voice loud and clear. "Ryan, this is for you." A brand new laptop. Ryan's eyes widened, his face lighting up with excitement. "Seriously?" His voice was filled with disbelief. I glanced at my parents. They looked proud, like they had something to do with this. My mom leaned in to whisper to a relative, "See? Ethan wouldn't dare show up empty-handed." My dad nodded approvingly. He knows his responsibilities after all. And that was the moment I snapped. I smirked slightly and said, "Actually, I don't think you need it anymore." The room fell silent. Ryan's smile disappeared. My mother's expression stiffened. My father's eyes narrowed. I turned to the delivery guy. "I'd like to cancel the order." For a second, he hesitated, But then he nodded. Understood. The store will refund the amount minus a small cancellation fee. That's fine. Thank you. The restaurant was dead silent. Then all hell broke loose. Ryan shot up from his seat, his chair scraping against the floor. Are you kidding me? My father slammed his hand on the table. What the hell are you doing? Are you trying to embarrass this family? My mother gasped. Why would you pull such a cruel stunt? The whispers turned into a buzz of judgmental voices. I stayed calm. Without another word, I turned and walked toward the exit. But just before stepping out, I looked back and said, You never saved a seat for me, so why should I spend $2,000 in this family? Then I walked away, leaving behind a stunned room filled with people who finally saw me not as an afterthought, but as someone who was done playing their game. And for the first time in my life, I felt free. I didn't go home right away after leaving the restaurant. Instead, I drove aimlessly, the city lights blurring past me. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary, my mind replaying every moment of the night. The whispers, the judgmental looks, my mother's sharp words, it all churned inside me. A storm I couldn't quite silence. Eventually, I found myself parked outside a small coffee shop I used to visit during college. It wasn't anything special, just a quiet place where no one knew me. Exactly what I needed. I ordered an Americano, picked a corner seat, and let my body sink into the chair, exhaustion settling over me like a heavy blanket. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, but I barely noticed. My thoughts kept circling back to the past, how I had spent years bending over backward for a family that never saw me. How every achievement of mine was brushed aside, while Ryan was celebrated for the smallest things. I remembered the math competition I won in middle school. My parents barely acknowledged it. But when Ryan scored a single goal in a district soccer match, they threw him a party. In high school, when I topped my class, they didn't say a word. But when Ryan barely passed a subject after retaking an exam, they took him out for a fancy dinner to celebrate his hard work. In college, that was the final proof. I had worked 3 jobs to support myself. Never once did I ask for help. Ryan, they paid his tuition, bought him a car, and gave him a monthly allowance. And on my graduation day, no party, no guests. Just them asking, so where are you taking us out to eat? I let out a quiet laugh, bitter and tired. How had I convinced myself, for so long, that this was normal, that this was love? I was still in that coffee shop when my phone buzzed. A message from my mother. Mom, come home. We need to talk. I stared at the screen for a moment before locking my phone and sliding it into my pocket. I wasn't ready for whatever lecture or guilt trip they had prepared. Instead, I finished my coffee and headed to my apartment, a small 1-bedroom place I had rented just a few months earlier when I finally decided I needed space from my parents. Walking inside, I sighed in relief at the silence. No nagging, no demands, just me. But my peace didn't last long. An hour later, there was a knock at the door. I already knew who it was before I even opened it. Standing there were my parents. My mom looked tired but composed, while my dad's expression was unreadable. For a second, I considered shutting the door in their faces, but I forced myself to step aside. Sit, I said, keeping my voice neutral. They didn't waste time. My mom was the first to speak. Ethan, what you did tonight was completely unnecessary. I crossed my arms. Unnecessary? Yes, she continued. You embarrassed Ryan in front of everyone. You humiliated this family. I let out a sharp laugh. Oh, I see. So it's okay when you ignore me, when you don't even bother saving me a seat at the table. But the moment I stop playing along, I'm the one embarrassing the family. My dad sighed heavily. We didn't mean to hurt you, Ethan. But Ryan's younger. He needs more support. I raised an eyebrow. He's 23, Dad. When I was his age, I was working 3 jobs to pay for my degree. You never offered me support. That's because you were always independent, my mom interjected. You never needed us the way Ryan does. I stared at her in disbelief. And that makes it okay? That justifies treating me like I don't matter? Silence. My mom looked away. My dad rubbed his temples, clearly frustrated. We just want this family to stay together, he said after a moment. I exhaled slowly, shaking my head. No, you just want me to keep playing my role. The responsible older son who doesn't ask for anything, who takes care of himself so you can focus on Ryan. My mom's jaw tightened. That's not true. I met her gaze. Then, why are you here? She hesitated. Then, in a quieter voice, she said, The bill from the restaurant. It was more than we expected. We were hoping you could cover half. I laughed. A full, genuine laugh. Not because it was funny, because it was so absurd, I almost couldn't believe it. Let me get this straight, I said, my tone dripping with sarcasm. You came all the way here, not to apologize, but to ask for money? Again? My dad shifted uncomfortably. It's just a one-time thing. My mom blinked. What? I leaned forward slightly. I said no. I'm not giving you a single cent. Her expression darkened. Ethan, don't be selfish. We're family. I let out a slow breath. You're right. We are family. But family isn't supposed to treat each other like this. Family is supposed to love each other equally, not pick favorites. Family is supposed to celebrate everyone's achievements, not just one child's. Family isn't about who can give the most money. If that's your definition of family, then maybe I don't want to be a part of it anymore. Silence stretched between us. For the first time, I saw something flicker in my mother's eyes, something like realization, but it was gone just as quickly. She stood up abruptly. Fine. If you want to walk away from your family, then go ahead. But don't come crawling back when you realize you need us. I met her gaze, calm and unwavering. I won't. They left without another word. The moment the door shut behind them, I felt something shift inside me. Relief. Not sadness, not regret, just relief. For years, I had convinced myself that I needed their approval, that if I just worked a little harder, they'd finally see me. But tonight, I finally understood. It was never about me. No matter what I did, I was never going to be enough for them, because they had already decided who mattered more. And that was okay, because now I was done trying. For the first time in my life, I was choosing myself. And it felt damn good. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was finally in control. No more obligations, no more expectations, no more being treated like an afterthought. I had spent years twisting myself into something more palatable for my parents, hoping foolishly that one day they would see me, appreciate me. But after that night, standing in the silence of my apartment, I realized that I had been chasing something that never existed. I woke up the next morning with an unfamiliar sense of peace. No nagging texts, no requests for favors, just silence. It felt foreign, but also freeing. Then, a notification popped up on my phone. Mom, Ethan, let's talk. Just us. No pressure. I stared at the message for a long moment, debating whether I should even reply. Was this another trick? Another attempt to guilt trip me into handing over money? Or did she finally realize what they had done? Against my better judgment, I responded. Me? Fine. Where? She suggested a small cafe downtown, one we had never been to before. That alone was suspicious. My parents were creatures of habit. They didn't try new things unless they had a reason. But I went anyway, if only to confirm what I already suspected. When I arrived, she was already seated at a corner table. Sipping tea like this was just another normal day. Ethan, she greeted, offering a small smile. You look well. I sat down across from her, not responding to the pleasantries. What do you want, Mom? She sighed, stirring her tea absent-mindedly. I want us to move forward. What happened at the restaurant? It got out of hand. I know you were upset, and I understand why. I waited, sensing there was more. But family is family, Ethan. No matter what's happened, we have to take care of each other. And there it was, the real reason for this meeting. I leaned back, crossing my arms. Let me guess. You need something. She hesitated. Then, as if she had rehearsed it, she said, Ryan wants to start his own business. A small cafe, actually. He has the passion, but not the financial backing. We were hoping you could help. I couldn't help it. I laughed. A short, humorless sound. Unbelievable. It's not what you think, she said quickly. This isn't just for Ryan. It's for the family. We all benefit if he succeeds. I gave her a pointed look. You mean he benefits? She shook her head. No, Ethan. This could bring us closer together. You two could work together. I cut her off. Stop. She blinked, startled. I leaned forward, my voice low and steady. Do you hear yourself? You ignored me my entire life, treated me like I was disposable. And now, after I finally walk away, you come to me not to apologize, not to make things right, but to ask for money. Again. Her expression faltered, but she quickly masked it. That's not fair. I scoffed. Isn't it? Tell me, Mom, when have you ever supported me? When have you ever put my needs first? She opened her mouth, but nothing came out, because she didn't have an answer. I exhaled, shaking my head. No, I'm done. I'm not funding Ryan's cafe. I'm not paying your bills. I'm not your backup plan. For a moment, she just sat there, stunned. Then, her face hardened. Ethan, you're being unreasonable. No, I corrected, standing up. For once, I'm being fair to myself. And with that, I walked out. Days passed, and the silence stretched on. No calls, no texts. At first, it felt like a victory. Then, something shifted. I was at work when my phone lit up with a message from my cousin, Emily. Emily, hey, just a heads up. Your parents are telling the whole family you abandoned them. They're making you sound like the bad guy. I sighed. Of course they were. I had seen this tactic before. When Ryan failed a class in high school, it wasn't because he didn't study, it was because the teacher had it out for him. When he crashed his car, it wasn't his fault, it was a poorly designed road. Now that I had walked away, they weren't going to reflect on their actions. They were going to make me the villain. Me. Let them. Emily, you don't care what they say? Me. I stopped caring the moment I left that restaurant. And it was true. My whole life I had craved their approval. Now I realized I didn't need it. I was finally free. 6 months passed. And in that time, I flourished. My career took off. I moved into a better apartment. And for the first time in years, I felt genuinely happy. Then, one day, my phone rang. It was my father. I hesitated before answering. Ethan, he said. His voice was different, weaker. I frowned. What is it? There was a long pause. Then, in a voice I barely recognized, he said, We lost the house. I froze. What? He sighed heavily. Ryan's cafe failed. We invested everything into it, and it still wasn't enough. We had to sell the house to cover the debts. I let that sink in. The same house they had chosen over me. The same house they expected me to help fund. Gone. We're looking for a smaller place, he continued. But money is tight. There it was. The real reason for this call. I took a slow breath. What do you want, Dad? Another pause. Then, reluctantly, he said, We were hoping you could lend us something, just until we get back on our feet. I closed my eyes, exhaling through my nose. No. Ethan, please. I said no. My voice was calm, but firm. You made your choice. You placed all your bets on Ryan. You made it clear I was never a priority. And now, you want me to clean up the mess? We're still your parents, he said, a desperate edge creeping into his tone. And I'm still your son, I said. But you never treated me like one. A long silence. Finally, he sighed. I see. For the first time, I heard something real in his voice. Not manipulation, not entitlement, just regret. But it was too late. Goodbye, Dad. I hung up, and I didn't look back. Hanging up on my father should have felt like a victory. A final, resounding rejection of everything they had put me through. But as I set my phone down, a strange numbness settled over me. Not sadness, not regret, just the weight of reality sinking in. This was it. There was no going back. No fixing what had been broken long before I ever walked away. I stared out the window of my apartment, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. The place was quiet, peaceful, everything my childhood home had never been. Yet, for some reason, my mind kept drifting back to that house, the one they had sacrificed everything for. They had put all their faith, all their resources into Ryan, believing he was the future. And now, they had nothing. Part of me thought, serves them right. But another part of me, the part that had spent years craving their approval, felt something else. Not sympathy, not forgiveness, just finality. They had made their choices. Now they had to live with them. Days passed, then weeks. My father didn't call again. My mother didn't text. The silence stretched on, and this time, it didn't feel like a punishment. It felt like peace. Then, one evening, as I was leaving work, my phone buzzed with an unexpected notification. A message from Ryan. Ryan, we need to talk. I stared at the screen for a long moment, debating whether to ignore it. But against my better judgment, I responded, Me, why? Ryan, just meet me, please. His sudden civility caught me off guard. Ryan had never been one for pleasantries, especially with me. Curiosity got the better of me, and before I could talk myself out of it, I agreed. We met at a bar downtown Neutral Territory. When I arrived, he was already there, nursing a drink. He looked different. not the carefree, golden boy Ryan I had grown up with. He looked tired, worn down. I sat across from him. "All right, talk," Ryan exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "Look, I know I wasn't the best brother. I know Mom and Dad put all their attention on me, and I didn't really think about how that affected you." I raised an eyebrow. "You didn't really think about it?" He winced. "Yeah. I guess I was just so used to it, I never questioned it." I leaned back in my chair, folding my arms. "And now that everything's fallen apart, you finally want to talk?" He flinched at my bluntness, but nodded. "Yeah." I studied him for a moment, searching for any sign of manipulation. But for once, I didn't see entitlement, just exhaustion. Still, I wasn't about to let him off the hook that easily. "So," I said, tilting my head, "what do you want from me?" "Money? No." His answer was immediate. I don't know. I guess I wanted to see if we could fix things between us." That threw me off. Ryan had never cared about fixing anything before. I didn't respond right away. I just watched him, waiting. He sighed. "You were right, about everything." That made me pause. Ryan had never admitted. I was right about anything. He took a sip of his drink, staring down at the table. I thought the cafe would work. Mom and Dad had so much faith in me. I started believing it too, but I had no idea what I was doing. I made bad decisions, lost money fast, and when it all went under, Mom and Dad were devastated. But not at me. He let out a dry laugh. They just blamed the market. Said I had bad luck, that if I tried again, things would be different. I scoffed. "Of course they did." Ryan shook his head. "They still don't get it. They still think I can do no wrong. But I know I messed up. I was given everything, and I wasted it." For the first time, I heard real regret in his voice, and I wasn't sure how to feel about that. I let out a slow breath. "So, what now?" Ryan hesitated. "I don't know. I guess I wanted to own up to it. To you." I studied him carefully. "And what do you expect from me? Forgiveness?" He shook his head. "No. I just wanted you to know I see it now. Everything you said that night at the restaurant, you were right." His words hung between us, heavier than I expected. I had spent my entire life feeling like I was screaming into the void, unheard and unacknowledged. And now, finally, Ryan was saying the words I never thought I'd hear. But was it enough? I wasn't sure. So, I simply nodded. "Good. I hope you actually mean that." He met my gaze, a flicker of something genuine in his eyes. "I do." We sat in silence for a moment before he finally sighed. "I should go." I nodded. "Take care, Ryan." For the first time in years, he didn't smirk, didn't make a sarcastic comment. He just nodded. "You too." Then he left. I sat there for a while, staring at my untouched drink, wondering what the hell had just happened. For years, Ryan had been the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. And now, after losing everything, he was finally facing reality. It wasn't an apology. Not really. But maybe it was the closest I'd ever get. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. I wasn't sure where we stood now, if we were still brothers or just two people with shared history. But for the first time, I felt like I could stop looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next betrayal, because it didn't matter anymore. I had already moved on, and no matter what happened next, I wasn't going back. Ryan's words stayed with me longer than I expected. For years, I had convinced myself that he would never change, that he was too deep in our parents' favor to ever see the truth. And yet, there he was, admitting what I had known all along. I wasn't sure how to feel about that. It wasn't an apology, not really. And it didn't erase the years of being overlooked, the way our parents had treated me like an afterthought. But it was something, a crack in the perfect image he had always been given. Still, I wasn't naive. People don't change overnight. And I wasn't about to open the door back into my life just because Ryan had finally faced reality. I had spent too long waiting for them to see me. Now, I was done waiting. A few weeks passed, and I kept expecting another call, another text, another attempt to pull me back into the mess I had walked away from. But it never came. Instead, life moved forward. Work was going better than ever. Without the weight of my family's expectations dragging me down, I had been able to focus fully on my career, and it was paying off. My boss had noticed my efforts, and for the first time, I was in serious talks about a promotion. Outside of work, I finally had time for myself. I picked up old hobbies, reading, running, even learning how to cook more than just basic meals. My apartment, once just a place to sleep, started feeling like a real home. I even reconnected with old friends, people I had drifted from over the years while I was too busy trying to prove myself to people who would never care. For the first time in my life, I felt free. And I wasn't about to give that up. One evening, as I was unwinding after work, I got a message from Emily. Emily, hey, you might want to hear this. I raised an eyebrow, already bracing myself. Me, what now? Emily, Mom and Dad are selling off everything they can. They're really struggling. I stared at the message for a long moment, feeling nothing. No satisfaction, no regret. Just confirmation of what I already knew would happen. Me and Emily, they're telling people you abandoned them, that you let them suffer while you're out there living the high life. I scoffed. Of course, they were. It was never their fault. It was never Ryan's failure, never their own bad decisions. It was always someone else's responsibility to fix things for them. And since I refused to play my part, I was now the villain. Me, let them talk. I don't care. Emily, I figured you'd say that. Just wanted to warn you in case they try to guilt trip you again. Me, thanks, but I'm done playing their game. Emily, good. You deserve better. I didn't respond to that, but for the first time I actually believed it. A week later, I got an unexpected visitor. I had just come back from a run when I heard the knock on my door. Wiping sweat from my face, I opened it, only to find my mother standing there. I wasn't surprised. If anything, I was surprised it had taken her this long. She looked tired, her usual carefully maintained appearance slightly disheveled. Ethan, I didn't move aside. What do you want? She sighed, as if I was the difficult one. Can I come in? I folded my arms. Say what you need to say. Her lips pressed together, but she didn't argue. Instead, she got right to the point. Your father and I are struggling. We need help. I almost laughed. Help? I repeated. You mean money? She hesitated, but then nodded. Yes, just enough to get back on our feet. I leaned against the doorframe, staring at her. You really don't see it, do you? She frowned. See what? That this is exactly why I walked away, I said. You don't come to me because you care. You don't check in because you miss me. You only show up when you need something. Her face tightened. That's not fair. I gave a dry laugh. Isn't it? Tell me, Mom, when have you ever put me first? When have you ever reached out just to ask how I'm doing? Silence. She looked away, unable to answer. I shook my head. I spent years giving everything I had to this family, and it was never enough. But the second Ryan needed something, you bent over backward to make it happen. Now that you've lost everything, now you want my help? We're still your parents, she said, her voice softer now. That has to mean something. I studied her for a long moment. It did mean something, but not in the way she wanted. It meant that I owed it to myself to break the cycle, to stop letting them use me. So, I took a slow breath and said, no. She blinked. What? No, I repeated. I'm not giving you money. I'm not bailing you out. Her lips parted, as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. Ethan, I mean it, I cut in. I'm done. You chose Ryan. You chose to put everything into him, to ignore me, to treat me like an afterthought. Now you get to live with that decision. She stared at me, and for the first time, I saw something crack in her expression. A flicker of something real. But it was too late. I hope you figure things out, I said, but it won't be with my help. And then, before she could say another word, I shut the door. I stood there for a long time, listening to the silence on the other side. Then, finally, I let out a breath I hadn't even realized I was holding. It was done. Really, truly done. For years, I had let them dictate my worth. I had spent my entire life chasing scraps of their approval, convincing myself that if I just tried hard enough, they would see me, but they never would. And now, I no longer needed them to. I wasn't angry. I wasn't bitter. I just felt free. For the first time in my life, I was living for me, and I wasn't looking back. After shutting the door on my mother, I expected the guilt to creep in. I waited for the old feelings, the self-doubt, the urge to make things right to return. But they never did. Instead, I felt lighter. I had spent years carrying the weight of a family that only saw me as a resource. For the first time, I set it down, and I wasn't picking it back up. I didn't hear from them again after that. No calls, no texts, no last-ditch attempts to change my mind. Maybe they finally understood that I meant what I said. Maybe they were too proud to keep begging. Either way, it didn't matter. I was done. And my life was finally my own. Months passed. Life moved forward. I got the promotion at work. It came with a better salary, more responsibility, and for the first time in my career, I felt truly valued. Not for what I could give, not for what was expected of me, but because I had earned it. I upgraded my apartment, furnishing it with things that actually made it feel like home. I found joy in the little things: quiet mornings with coffee, late night movies without interruptions, the simple peace of knowing that no one was waiting to take something from me. I traveled, something I had never been able to do before, always too caught up in obligations that weren't mine to bear. I saw places I had only dreamed of, met people outside of the world I had grown up in. I built a life that was entirely my own, and I had no regrets. One evening, I was out with some friends when my phone buzzed, a number I didn't recognize. At first, I thought about ignoring it, but something told me to pick up. "Hello?" A hesitant voice answered. "Hey." I froze. "Ryan?" "Yeah." He let out a breath, like he had been holding it in. "Look, I know I'm the last person you probably want to hear from, but I wanted to check in." I stayed silent, waiting. "I've been thinking a lot since we talked," he continued. "About everything. About how I grew up with everything handed to me and never questioned it. How I let mom and dad make you the outsider. And I don't know, man. I hate that it took losing everything for me to finally see it." His voice sounded different than before. Less entitled. More real. I exhaled slowly. "Okay, I'm not calling to ask for anything," he said quickly. "I swear, I don't want to be like them. And if there's any chance I can fix things with you, I want to try." I leaned against the railing outside the bar, staring up at the night sky. If he had said this a year ago, I would have been suspicious. Would have assumed he was just trying to manipulate me like our parents did. But something about his tone told me he meant it. Still, I wasn't about to jump into anything. "Ryan," I said carefully, "I don't know what kind of relationship we can have after everything. I'm not going to pretend like it never happened." "I know," he said, "and I don't expect that. I want to be better. And if that means proving it over time, then I will." For a long moment, I didn't say anything. Then, finally, I nodded to myself. "Okay, we'll see." A pause. Then, a relieved chuckle. "I'll take that." We didn't talk long. Just enough to acknowledge that something had shifted. That maybe there was room for something new. Not the forced, unequal relationship we had before. Something real. It wouldn't be instant. It wouldn't erase the past. But for the first time, I was open to seeing where it went. Months turned into a year. My parents never reached out again, and I never expected them to. They had made their choice, and I had made mine. Ryan, though, he kept his word. He didn't try to force a relationship. He didn't ask for anything. He just showed up, little by little. A random text checking in, an invitation to grab a drink, no pressure, no strings attached. At first, I kept my distance. But over time, I let my guard down, and surprisingly, I didn't regret it. He had finally grown up. For the first time, I saw him as his own person, not just the spoiled kid our parents had raised. He was learning, taking responsibility, trying to build something for himself instead of expecting it to be handed to him. And because of that, we found common ground. Not as the golden child and the forgotten son, just as brothers. One evening, as I was closing up my apartment, my phone buzzed. A message from Ryan. Ryan found this old pic of us as kids. Thought you'd get a laugh. Attached was a photo of us, maybe 5 and 7 years old, covered in mud after playing outside. We were grinning like idiots, no rivalry, no resentment. Just 2 kids before everything got complicated. I smiled. For the first time, I let myself remember the good. And as I put my phone down, I realized something. I had spent years chasing validation from people who would never give it, trying to prove my worth to a family that only saw me as useful when I had something to offer. But that part of my life was over. I had built something better, a life of my own, one where I was seen, one where I was enough, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. Story 2. When I was 18, my parents left me in an abandoned campground. Yes, you heard correctly. I was left alone at the campsite as they drove off. No water, no food, only a hurriedly scrawled message. Locate your house. This is the lesson for you. They believed it would help me mature. They were unaware, however, that it was the day I made the decision to permanently leave their life. Hi there. My name is Brian. The director of a survival skills training organization is 30 years old. It may sound strange, but you would understand why I took this route if you understood how I was raised. I was born into a household that raised kids in a very unusual way. My parents felt that a person could only become strong through adversity. I was forced to be autonomous at an early age in ways that no child should ever be. No support, no consolation. They refer to these unrelenting teachings as life preparation. They then went too far at the age of 18. I came to the realization that this family would never be my home that day. I also made the decision to permanently leave them on that day. It was a hot summer afternoon on that particular day. The parched ground below was scorched by the sun as it burned through the tree canopy. The eerie calm of the woodland encampment was broken by the hum of insects. This location was selected for a weekend camping trip by my parents, Richard and Diane, which is not often done in our family, Emily. Sitting next to our stack of bags, my elder sister and I looked over the empty campsite. No other groups of buddies or families on vacation, just the two of us in unspoiled wilderness. I couldn't recall when our parents had taken us on a vacation like this before, but I was certain that they never made an effort to make us happy. We arranged our things and set up the tent before enjoying a basic lunch of bottled water and cold sandwiches. This was a typical trip, according to my parents, but something didn't feel right. They were too laid back, too amiable. Don't bug me about my laziness. There were no critical looks when I took a break. I was suspicious of their unexpected friendliness because I was accustomed to their strict parenting approach. After comfortably extending his legs and leaning back, my dad spoke. "Get some firewood, Brian. Tonight we're going to have a campfire." I looked around. Emily, my sister, gave me a quick glance with a hint of worry in her eyes, but she remained silent. My mother added her voice. She said in an oddly soft voice, "It's not that far. Just leave and return as soon as possible." I had no reason to reject, yet a weird feeling crept over me. I have never before been permitted to take my time or refuse an assignment. I got up, dusted the dust off my trousers, and followed a little track into the woods. They were correct. The space wasn't as big as I thought. I would need to collect enough firewood and return in around 15 minutes. However, I was mistaken. Finding dry branches proved to be more difficult than anticipated, and each time I leaned down to pick one up, a sense of unease crept into my thoughts. A slight unease, but I was unable to identify the cause. Half an hour had gone by. When I eventually made it back to the campground, it was all gone. No car, no tent, no bags. Emily and my parents are nowhere to be seen. I went cold. My breath became quick and shallow, and my heart began to pound in my chest. The whole place was spotless, as though no one had ever set a tent there. No garbage was present. No tire traces, only a stifling, unsettling quiet. Then I noticed it on the rock where we had just had our midday meal. A piece of paper was lying there nicely, as though it had been there for a long time. I took a deep breath and moved in closer. As I lifted it, my hands shook. The sloppy penmanship gazed back at me. "Locate your house. This is the lesson for you." Despite my repeated readings, the wording remained the same. I initially believed this to be a joke. It is possible that they just relocated the campground to a neighboring location. Trying not to panic, I inhaled deeply before yelling, "Dad! Mom! Emily!" No response. There was nothing but the rustle of the wind through the trees. There were usually people at this campsite, but today, there were none. Panic slowly started to creep into my thoughts. I took a deep breath. Why is this taking place? The question kept repeating in my mind. I took out my phone without thinking and called my mother. The call was unsuccessful. I looked at the display. I didn't have a strong signal, not even a single flickering bar. I felt a surge of nervousness. I couldn't remain in this place. It was time for me to leave before dark. Keeping an eye on my phone signal, I began to walk along the trail that led out of the campsite. Sweat began to trickle down my brow after 2 miles or so, but my signal eventually stabilized. I called my mother again right away. Before she could speak, the phone rang 3 times before she picked it up. With a sharp exhale, I spoke in a frustrated tone. "Quit tinkering. Get me when you return." She continued to speak calmly, as though this were merely a small annoyance. Brian, I'm serious. Go back. It's best for you to do this. I went cold. Ideal for me. Through leaving me to fend for myself in the middle of nowhere. My hand clenched around the phone. She let out a sigh. She spoke in the same patronizing patience I had heard all my life. Don't be dramatic, Brian. Beep, beep. The call ended. I looked down at my phone, but there was no signal again. After that call with my mom, I knew I had to escape my family. But first I had to get out of here. I picked up my pace, my footsteps pounding against the dry ground, my mind racing through options. My parents weren't coming back. They wouldn't come back. I couldn't let myself be trapped in this twisted lesson. I pulled out my phone again and dialed 911. Beep, beep. I held my breath, eyes locked on the screen. Please connect. For nearly 10 minutes, I walked while repeatedly trying to call. Finally, 911. What's your emergency? I exhaled sharply, relief washing over me. But my voice was tense when I spoke. I've been abandoned at a remote campsite. My parents left me here and I cannot get back. There was a brief silence on the other end. Then the dispatcher's voice, professional, but laced with skepticism. Can you give me your exact location? Are you injured? I looked around, trying to recall the sign I had passed when we first arrived. I'm near the main trail by the entrance to Bear Creek Campground. The closest town is, I'm not sure, maybe 10 miles away. I swallowed hard, gripping my phone tighter. I'm not injured, but I have no food, no water, and it's getting dark. The dispatcher quickly typed in the details. What's your name? I hesitated, then decided to give them everything. Brian Miller. All right, Brian. I've sent a location signal to your phone. Can you stay put? I glanced down the long, empty trail ahead. A part of me wanted to keep walking, to keep pushing forward, but I knew they would find me faster if I stayed put. Indeed, I'll remain here. I exhaled shakily, emotions flowing inside me. We're assigning a park patrol unit to your area. Keep your phone with you, and if anything changes, contact us back immediately. Got it, thank you. The call ended, but inside me, a tempest still raged. I wasn't just waiting to be saved. I was waiting for a new life, a life without them. After what felt like an eternity of waiting, I heard the sound of tires crunching on the gravel road nearby. I had lost count of time. A black SUV came up and 2 cops jumped out, their outfits featuring the county sheriff's department logo. One was a rough-looking man in his 40s, the other younger, possibly a novice. Miller, Brian. The senior officer inquired as he looked about, evaluating the circumstances. Indeed, I am that. Even though my voice was still tight, I made an effort to remain calm. Are you hurt? He examined every inch of me. I gave a head shake. No, I'm all right. However, my parents left me here. The younger cop, obviously taken aback by what I had just stated, wrinkled his brow. You were abandoned? He said it again. I nodded and tightened my grip on my phone. They left me a message instructing me to make my way home before they drove away. Such an act is not the first time they have done it. After exchanging glances, the senior officer spoke. Okay, you will be returned to the station by us. From there, you may phone a relative. We'll get in touch with your parents as well. After half an hour, I was sitting in the police station with an unopened hot cup of coffee on the table in front of me. The silence in the room seemed uncanny. My parents made this decision even though I wasn't intended to be here. Uncle Jack, the only family member who had ever voiced disapproval of my parents' parenting style, was the first person I contacted when I got there. My parents were on the phone with another police in the meanwhile. They all came 2 hours later. Richard and Diane, my parents, entered without showing the least bit of concern. They didn't feel guilty or anxious about leaving their son in the midst of the forest. Rather, they appeared annoyed just behind them. Uncle Jack came in with a stern expression. I could tell he was about to blow out just by looking into his eyes. Calm yet forceful, the officer behind the counter spoke. Are you Brian Miller's parents? My dad nodded and crossed his arms. Yes, exactly. Is anything wrong? The officer looked up after taking a quick check at the report in front of him. The issue is that after being abandoned at a secluded location, your kid dialed 911. The report says you drove away without telling him. Is that right? My mother crossed her arms and groaned, obviously irritated by the trouble. Indeed, that's right. However, he is 18. This is not what we consider to be abandonment. We were imparting a practical life lesson to him. It was like being slapped across the face by that words. I tried to maintain my composure by clenching my hands beneath the table. The officer's tone slowed as he cocked his head. Do you know that what you're doing can be interpreted as abandoning a dependent? He had no food, no drink, no vehicle, and no quick means to get in touch with anyone. My dad sneered. He's not a kid. It is more than possible for him to care for himself. Nothing went wrong on our end. Uncle Jack slapped his fist on the table abruptly after being silent up to this point. Nothing is wrong, Richard. Like a careless fool, you abandoned your son stranded in the woods. Are you too even aware of the concept of boundaries? My mom gave him a fierce look. Jack, don't get involved. You have no business here. It's none of my business. He chuckled bitterly. How many years have I been warning you about this, do you know? Do you believe that being a parent entails abandoning your child in the middle of nowhere and instructing him to survive? This is not training for the military. My dad crossed his arms. I saw his voice. He is 18. He's capable of taking care of himself, right? Leaning forward, the cop interlaced his fingers. Richard, you're correct about one thing. His eyes were fixed on my dad. You can no longer make decisions for Brian because he is 18. There was silence in the room, as though the officer had just given them the chills. My parents gazed at him. Uncle Jack spoke softer as he turned to face me. You can accompany me home now, Brian. You are no longer required to endure this. For the first time that day, I felt something near safety as I looked into his eyes. But before I could respond, my mother's voice cried out, "No, he's our son. We're taking him home." The cop looked at her. His voice was more piercing than before. "Diane, no, Brian is 18, as you just mentioned. Thus, he has the option." I remained silent when the officer finished speaking. I got up and went directly to Uncle Jack's vehicle. My parents were stunned by a reality they had never thought of and stayed motionless. They had always thought they could keep me under control. However, they became aware for the first time that they had lost what they considered to be their property. Uncle Jack patted my shoulder reassuringly and followed me. I looked back, even though I didn't have to. I looked over at them, Diane and Richard. Since you left me in that forest, the people who gave me life, but never really treated me as their son, have regarded me as dead. Every word was as sharp as a blade, despite the uncanny calmness of my voice. My mother opened her mouth as though she was trying to find something to say, but nothing came out. My father's face was expressionless as he stood motionless. I knew he was shaken, though. I turned my back and continued walking. Nothing more could be said. I have nothing left to stop me. I had trouble sleeping that night. Even though Uncle Jack's house was silent, my mind was blaring with noise. Memories rolled like a vintage movie, rewinding scenes that I had made a concerted effort to forget. I recalled the occasion when my mother purposefully abandoned me in a grocery store. It was my 10th birthday. I was holding her hand one moment. She was gone the next day and vanishing into the crowd. I ran through the aisles in a panic, crying as I called for her. When I finally broke down, I found her 15 minutes later. Unfazed, she just stood with her arms crossed. Didn't you find your way? Excellent. Now you know how to take care of yourself. No hugs, no excuses, simply icy indifference, as though I were only an animal being tamed. I requested Emily to assist me with my schoolwork when I was 12 years old. Then they learned. Nobody is able to assist you with your schoolwork, my dad yelled. You deserve to fail if you are unable to solve it on your own. They had me study by myself till 2 in the morning that night. No direction, no texts, just digits and the faint glimmer of a bulb. I was unable to comprehend. Emily, too. She also received punishment for assisting me. I got a high fever when I was 16. My body burned, my brain swirled, and I was too tired to even sit up. I pleaded with my mom to let me skip school and remain at home. She declined. Her tone was icy and disinterested. Even when you're not feeling well, life goes on. Rise. That day, I forced myself to go to school. By midday, I was at my breaking point. I fell down on my desk. My entire body shook. The nurse had to be called by the instructor, and my mother didn't come to get me until the school called her. However, she never inquired about my well-being. She was upset that I had bothered her while she was at work. And now that I'm 18, they have once again deserted me. Weary, I didn't even realize I was falling asleep. My parents arrived to Uncle Jack's residence at 8 a.m. the next day. Knocks reverberated through the door, furious and angry. more annoyance than worry. With no plans to go outdoors, I sat in the kitchen, clutching my coffee cup. The sound of my father's voice was loud and annoyed. Jack pulled the door open. "We must speak with Brian." Uncle Jack let out a sigh, put down his newspaper, got up, and opened the door. He asked me in silence whether I wanted to see them as he looked back at me. I remained silent. I just gave a head shake. The door opened wide. Uncle Jack remained steadfast, his speech uncompromising. "He's not interested in seeing you." My mother tried to shove by him right away, but he stopped her. "He is our son. He should live with us." She lost her temper. Uncle Jack remained still. His eyes are icy. "You still have the audacity to insist that he return home and to refer to him as your son." His voice lowered as he cocked his chin in their direction. "You leave him in the forest and then expect everything to get back to normal." My dad's forehead wrinkled. Despite his best efforts to seem composed, his tone betrayed his annoyance. "Jack, that was only a lesson. This is getting out of control for Brian." Uncle Jack laughed sharply and without humor. Disgust flooded his gaze. "A lesson that may have resulted in your son dying in the woods and no one being able to find him. Richard." My mom folded her arms. Her tone became belligerent. "Jack, this is none of your concern. Don't interfere with our family affairs." Uncle Jack took a deep breath before speaking slowly and deliberately, his words striking the ground like a hammer. "Diane, no. When you left Brian, he had to dial 911 in order to rescue himself. It was no longer solely your family's company at that point." Quiet. They had no answer for the first time. "Is there anything else?" Uncle Jack had lost his patience. "If not, depart." For a brief while, they seemed to be waiting for something. However, nothing appeared. At last, my mother turned away and dragged my father along with her. After leaving the porch, they got into their vehicle and drove away, and I didn't see them again for years after that. The last picture I had was of them leaving Uncle Jack's house, with nothing but their failure and pride. I was notified via email 2 weeks later that I had been accepted into the business administration program at the University of California, Berkeley. I read it several times while blinking. I was on the verge of misinterpreting it when I was certain it was genuine. Before telling Uncle Jack the news, I put my phone on the table and took a big breath to allow the reality sink in. He was in the living room, repairing an antique radio with care. When he saw me standing there, he used a screwdriver to tighten a loose screw, and there was a quiet click. He raised his head. His eyes were probing. I entered. Though everything was rushing within, my voice was quieter than I had anticipated. Uncle Jack was silent for a moment. After examining me for a while, he nodded slightly. He raised the corner of his lips a little, his manner of subtly expressing pride. "Excellent. Pack up now. I'll assist you with your dorm relocation. No excessive embraces, emotions, or congrats." Similar to several television programs, only recognition, have faith, and it was plenty for me. All I had when I moved into my dorm room was a backpack and a little suitcase. I unpacked alone, looking around the little, yet peaceful room. Every time I entered a door, the stress vanished. No more worrying about criticism or control. However, freedom came with responsibilities. I had to handle everything on my own, as my family didn't provide any financial assistance. I started looking for a job right away after taking out a low-interest student loan to pay for my education. My shift at a coffee shop on campus started at 5 in the morning. The initial weeks were difficult. It wasn't easy to stand behind the counter and continuously make coffee before daylight, but I managed to get used to it. I felt more rooted when my schedule was full. I went back to see Uncle Jack on the weekends via bus. His house was just far enough away to give me the impression that I was leaving the intensity of college life behind. When I returned home, Uncle Jack greeted me as though I had never been gone. No forced teachings, no lectures, no dissatisfied expressions. A cool beer and a warm meal are the only things on the table, and discussions in which I was not required to scrutinize every word I spoke. We occasionally sat there discussing politics, football, or other unrelated events that occurred at school. That's when I came to that realization. Family is not a place of birth. You are valued there. Unlike other students, I had to work part-time jobs to pay for my tuition and attend lectures during my college years. I devoted almost all of my leisure time to honing abilities I thought might eventually be useful. I knew I had to learn how to live when my parents left me in the woods. I studied escape strategies for harsh environments, watched programs on outdoor survival, and devoured survival books. The internet turned out to be my best resource. From obtaining clean water in the wilderness to signaling for help without communication gadgets, I trained myself how to do it all. The reality became more accurate as I gained knowledge. The majority of individuals are clueless on what to do in an emergency. I once overheard a group of patrons discussing a hiker who vanished in the woods while I was working at the cafe. After 3 days of being missing, he was finally located, tired and barely alive. That's when it finally clicked. Why not use what I've learned to benefit other people? I began modestly to share vital survival advice that I had discovered via books, films, and my own experience. I set up a YouTube channel, How to Survive If You Get Lost in the Woods. One of my films surprisingly received thousands of views. After initially receiving little attention, I continued to record basic instructions on my old phone and post them online, and I quickly discovered that a large audience was interested. Adventurers weren't the only ones who needed survival skills. A life-threatening circumstance might happen to anybody, and the repercussions could be disastrous if they don't know how to manage it. I made the decision to go further after graduation using a modest loan and some money I had saved up from my part-time employment. I formally started my own business, providing survival instruction. It was just me at first. From creating the website to managing social media advertisements to planning in-person classes, I handled it all. I began with fundamental training courses on how to survive in the woods, navigate when lost, call for help without a phone, and administer basic first aid without medical equipment. I taught more than simply theory. I exposed my pupils to real-world survival situations and practical training that compelled them to adjust and grow. And it was successful. My business began to attract notice within a year. Hikers, backpackers, and even corporate teams seeking team-building activities centered around survival started to join up. By the 3rd year, I had grown, collaborating with emergency response teams and rescue groups. That's when I came to a realization. The day I was left at Bear Creek Campground years ago was the beginning of what I built today. They believed they were shattering me. They believed they were driving me to fail and put me through misery. The lesson they imposed on me became the cornerstone of my achievement at that precise moment. They wanted me to become independent, but not in the way they had envisioned. During the years I devoted to developing my career, never once did my folks text or call. No. Congrats on my graduation. No inquiries regarding my work. It was as though I had never been here, and to be honest, I didn't mind. Even though I had severed my relationship with my parents, my sister and I continued to communicate, so I knew they were okay because of Emily. We met up when we could, texted frequently, and occasionally called. They weren't like Emily. Although she never condoned their treatment of me, she was unable to alter it either. She was the only family member I cared about. Yet, she continued to be a part of my life. I also felt fine. I had a work I liked, a life of independence, and most importantly, I had stayed far away from my parents. That was sufficient. That was my initial idea, anyhow. However, they pulled me back into their mess a year ago. The weekend was much like any other. I had a nice cup of coffee and was enjoying the morning at my flat. I'm browsing my laptop's newsfeed. My phone then buzzed. I looked at a name I hadn't seen in a decade on the screen. Mom. I remained motionless for a time, gazing at the name as though it were from a decade ago. No texts, no calls. Then, all of a sudden, they needed me. Naturally, I didn't respond. Rather, I turned my phone to silent, drank some coffee, and went back to reading. I was curious to find out how long they would persist. The calls continued. 5 minutes. 1,020. They were not going to give up. 40 minutes. The ringing stopped. I looked at my screen. 42 calls were missed. I chuckled to myself. Then a text message appeared. I'm having a lot of problems with your father. Brian, please help us. Give us a call back as soon as you receive this. I gazed at the message for a few seconds. Then, around midday, I immediately erased it. Emily gave a call. I knew something wasn't right since she never contacted me in the middle of the day like this. Her voice came through instantly when I picked it up, strained but not startled. Are you free, Brian? Let's meet where we usually do. After a little delay, I nodded. Okay, half an hour. We met in the cafe, where we always went when we had important things to talk about. First to arrive, Emily was seated in our typical nook. She gazed off into space as I entered, deep in contemplation. I took a seat and stared at her. What's happening? I made my position quite clear. Emily pressed her lips together and looked up before she spoke. It has to do with Mom and Dad. I didn't respond. I simply waited. She inhaled deeply before speaking carefully. I was duped into paying them money. In actuality, they said it was for an investment and promised rewards. Her eyes darkened as she paused. They lost it by gambling. I remained silent. I only observed her while she awaited the others. In addition, they obtained a mortgage on the home. Emily's voice trailed off, angry. I discovered they had lost everything when I heard them conversing. I folded my arms and reclined in my chair. They believed they could bring you down with them after screwing themselves. After nodding, Emily dropped her voice as if what she was going to say were even worse. Brian, she paused, then looked directly into my eyes. They have been keeping an eye on you. I scowled as I observed myself. Indeed, they are aware of your achievement. They are aware of your independence and financial success. Emily bit her lip. They just awaited your financial success before pursuing you. I gripped my coffee cup tighter as annoyance began to seep into my chest. Thus, this was their original plan. Can you come after me first? Emily gave a nod. They won't stop, you know that. I had to warn you because of this. Take caution. They arrived to my business the next day. This was what I had anticipated. Following all of Emily's information and the 42 missed calls from yesterday, this was bound to happen. I thought about avoiding them at first. I didn't want to deal with them because I had a busy day. Then an idea came to me. I'd spent enough time escaping them. This had to be over. They seemed just as I recalled them when they entered my office. But this time, they were out of control. In an attempt to look warm, my mother faked a grin. My father maintained his solemn demeanor as usual, but I could see the frustration in his eyes. You look so different, Brian. How much time has passed since our previous encounter? My mother's speech seemed odd and too pleasant. I folded my arms and reclined in my chair. A decade, I grinned. After a brief moment of hesitation, they swiftly composed themselves. How are you? You have always been on our minds. I interrupted them with a harsh chuckle. Get right to the point. You're here. But why? With a groan, my dad leaned forward. The problem is that we invested poorly. Our house is about to be taken by the bank. Could you lend us $150,000? I arched an eyebrow and burst out laughing. Poor financial decisions, I repeated, making fun of what they had said. I cocked my head, looking at them for a second, then shook it. I take that you intend to invest in a casino? Everything is already known to me. They had nothing left to conceal. I looked them in the eyes. My tone was forceful and decisive. Return home. I don't have any extra cash. And the day you abandoned me in that jungle, as I mentioned to you before I passed away. The room's vibe changed abruptly. Anger and frustration took the place of the phony grins. My mom glared at me while crossing her arms. My dad's voice grew stern. No more feigning, pleading. You wouldn't be where you are now if it weren't for me. He stared down at me while placing his hands on my desk. You were stronger after I left you in that wilderness. It equipped you with the survival abilities that have brought you this far. After a moment of staring at him, I burst out laughing. A real, sincere chuckle. I couldn't believe he thought that, not because he was correct. A notion came to me at that very time. I believed I never would have retaliation. I turned to face them, and this time, my smile wasn't derisive. Yes, it was calculated. My tone was uncannily serene. To regain the house, you'll need $150,000, correct? All right, you'll get $250,000 from me. To rescue the house, $150,000 was needed. An additional $100,000 for your retirement. What does it sound like? They hesitated for a moment. Then the rage was gone. My mother smiled for the first time during the entire talk. I know you were still concerned about us, Brian. She had a sickly sweet voice. My dad gave a nod. Satisfaction replaced skepticism. But I went on. But I have a requirement. The room's air became freezing, quiet. They bided their time. I stared them in the eye while crossing my arms. I'll leave you in the woods. My mother's jaw dropped. My dad's expression hardened. He furrowed his brow. I emphasized each word while speaking clearly and slowly. I'll give you the money if you can figure out how to get out in 3 days. Dead quiet for a few seconds. Then my dad hit the desk with a slam. You, he spoke in a low, angry voice. You are a tiny, ungrateful bastard. You treat your parents like this? I gave a shrug. You have a choice. Nobody is pressuring you. Calmly, I hit the button on my work phone. Please escort our visitors out. Security. 2 security officers stepped in. My folks got up quickly. Anger is red in their face. This is something you'll regret. As they were pushed towards the door, my mother let out a yell. I didn't answer. As I saw them being carried out of my office in the same manner that they had left me behind, I just sat back in my chair and crossed my arms. Since yesterday, I assumed it was over. My parents had been booted out of my firm, abandoned with nothing to hold on to. I had permanently severed my relationship with them, but I underestimated them. The buzzing on my phone continued the next day. I dismissed it at first. Before leaving, I made coffee, checked my work emails, and enjoyed a peaceful morning. But the calls kept coming one after another. Next came a call from my security guy. I snatched up the boss and scowled. We are in a predicament. He spoke tensely. Perhaps you shouldn't come in today. I stopped. Why? Reporters are gathered outside in a crowd. Cameras, microphones, a whole freaking crowd. You are being targeted by the media. I felt a surge of annoyance in my chest. What the hell did they do now? My phone buzzed once more at that moment. My helper. Her voice sounded weak as I responded. Have you watched the video, Brian? I scowled. Which video? She inhaled deeply. It is present everywhere. I gave the link to you just now. Now watch it. I clicked on the link after opening my phone. A video popped up. As soon as I pressed play, I realized. The recording from yesterday had been altered by my parents. No video showed them pleading for cash. Their gambling debts and their attempts to control me are not explained. The financial offer I made was not mentioned. Only one clip. My voice was sharp and cold as I sat at my desk and looked them in the eye. I'll leave you in the woods. If you make it through 3 days, I'll pay you the money. That was it. Nothing before. After that, nothing. That's all. It portrays me as a cold-blooded monster seeking to exact revenge by destroying my parents. Outrage erupted in the comments section beneath the video. Who treats their parents like this? This man became wealthy and lost sight of his parents. What an unappreciative and cruel son. He wants to abandon them in the woods after they have taken care of him for years. I gazed at the television, a chilly sensation creeping through my body. They did this. They went this far. My phone rang once more as soon as the video was over. Uncle Jack. I picked up. Are you all right, Brian? His voice was low, tense. I recently saw the video. I closed my eyes, taking a long breath. I can handle it, he called, and I wasn't shocked. He understood I wasn't the sort of person that video showed, but he also knew how ruthless the media could be. My parents didn't need me for 10 years, but now that they needed money, they had no problem painting me as a villain to get it. When they published this, I had no idea what they anticipated happening. But if they wanted a conflict, I wouldn't let them win. I called Emily immediately after speaking with Uncle Jack. She picked up on the second ring. Brian. Her voice communicated anxiety. She had probably already watched the video. I took a big breath. Emily, will you assist me? There was no hesitation. Of course. At 9:30, meet me at your office. I gave a nod. Even though she couldn't see me, I wasn't alone in this. I hung up on Emily and then called my assistant. She responded instantly, her voice tight. Boss, this is getting worse. There is media everywhere. They're looking for an answer. I sat back in my chair, my eyes keen and concentrated. Invite every reporter inside the company's conference room. I'll take care of this. At 9:30, she paused. Are you certain? Things could get worse if this doesn't work out. My voice was frigid, yet a grin pulled at my lips. Never have I been more certain. After hanging up, I picked up my vehicle keys and walked out of my apartment. Today, I wouldn't run. I'll wrap this up today. 9:30 a.m. I entered the conference space. Beside me was Emily. In front of us, the only family member I still had faith in. Dozens of reporters sat waiting, cameras rolling, microphones ready. They anticipated a major controversy, a feeble explanation, a desperate defense, or even a scandal. To play their game, however, was not my purpose. I held up my hand as soon as the questions began to flow, a quiet order for them to cease. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The entire, unedited footage from yesterday started to play on the big screen at the front of the room at that very moment. Don't cut. No coercion. The unvarnished reality as seen by the security cameras in my office. I turned to face the media as soon as the video was over. I speak in a calm yet piercing tone. This is the reality. Everyone has seen it. I've published this movie on my page. Feel free to download and share it. There was complete silence in the room. 5 seconds. 10 complete minutes. I looked at the faces before me. Startle. Knowledge. The journalists who had rushed to condemn me were now processing the fact that they'd been played. I shrugged, my tone void of anger. I'm just stating the obvious. Even if they had agreed to my challenge, I never would have left them in the woods. With a steady voice, I reclined in my chair. All I needed was for them to say, "We accept your challenge," and they would have earned $250. Instantly. I let that settle in before proceeding. But instead of taking that offer, they manipulated the story, twisting the truth just to paint me as the villain. After I talked, Emily stood up. Her voice trembled slightly, but her eyes were firm, unwavering. They didn't just lie to the public. They lied to me. They said it was for an investment when they seized my money. But in actuality, they gambled it away. With her hands clenched at her sides, she inhaled deeply. For years I kept quiet, but I'm no longer able to today. The entire room was dead silent as the reporters absorbed every word she said, capturing it all on their recorders. There was no turning back now that everyone in that room had witnessed the truth. That afternoon, the media exploded. The same publications that had dubbed me an ungrateful son were now trying to rectify themselves. Like wildfire, the original video went viral, generating a flurry of new headlines. The truth. Twisted parents destroyed their own son by editing a video. Who's the actual villain? The public is shocked by Brian's complete story. Parents gamble away their son's trust, all for money. I sat in my office skimming through a few articles, but I felt no satisfaction. I didn't require the support of the media, I just needed the truth to be known. I unlocked my phone and scrolled to their numbers one last time. I then blocked each of them individually, without hesitation. And ultimately, I removed their numbers, just like how they had deleted me from their life 10 years ago. I gave security one last command before I left the workplace. Turn them away if they come seeking for me. Make a 911 call if you have to. I was not going to give them another opportunity. I was the one who shut the door this time, and it would never open again. A year has passed since that day. Life has gone on smoothly, even better than before. My company is thriving, and I haven't been bothered again. Most importantly, I no longer think about them. But sometimes news still finds its way to me, even when I don't ask for it. Uncle Jack called Brian one afternoon while I was seated in my usual cafe. "Would you like to know how your parents are doing?" I was silent for a few seconds, then shrugged. "Yes, go ahead." He exhaled gently before informing me they had left town and relocated elsewhere. No one knew exactly where, but it was clear they had lost everything through a distant relative. I heard that they were now leading miserable lives. I didn't ask for details, and to be honest, I didn't care. They made their decisions. And my life is like this. My narrative has come to a conclusion. But now, my audience, I have a question for you. What would you have done if you were in my position? Do you think I was too harsh? Or did they get what they deserved? Let me know your opinions in the comments below. I'd appreciate your viewpoint, and if you enjoy tales like this, press the subscribe button so you won't miss the next one. See you in the next tale. Goodbye.